When measuring what something is best at, much like in every single one of my tier list videos, we have to measure it from the try-hard value point of view. What I mean to say that is, if you want to roleplay as a democratic republic that champions freedoms and republican ideals, yeah, you probably want to take plutocratic ideas and get that Bill of Rights. And if you want to play a pirate republic that rules the seas, you probably want to grab naval ideas followed by maritime. But from a try-hard point of view, if you want to prevent revolts, you don't need humanist ideas for that. If you want to rule the seas as a pirate republic, you don't need naval ideas or anything of that nature. And if you want to get 100 innovativeness or take technology cheaper and hire better advisors, sure, you could take innovative ideas, but the issue with innovative ideas is that taking them means you don't have another idea set which could help you expand and blob, and hence just affording the more expensive advisors without needing the 20% reduction. After all, what's better than 20% advisor cost? Having 20% more land that you can extract manpower and money from to not just pay for the advisors, but also pay for your armies and buildings like courthouses to help you keep conquering. To put simply, even though the individual bonuses in Innovative are good, they don't inherently solve a problem that can't be solved unironically by just go conquer more lol. Does this mean you have to play every game of EU4 optimally and Mega Blob every campaign as some kind of fervent cultist preaching the doctrine of map painting? No. If you are having fun dev-clicking Italy 150 times a second, go right ahead and take infrastructure, that's fine. But it's hard to judge what's fun. I am at best suggesting things you may consider fun after all. What I can judge though is what is the most optimal, assuming you're playing the game optimally, and hence this is what I'm going to be doing today. Thank you very much for your understanding, and finally, before we get into what I have to say today, a like on the video would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. But enough chatter, let's load into the random country and talk about our top 5. So here I am in England, a nation I famously never play, but I'm going to just use for this example today. And the first idea group at the top of our list at number 1 is going to be, to the surprise of probably absolutely no one, it's going to be administrative ideas. So why administrative ideas? Pretty much one single bonus in the Santier group makes it worthwhile, and that's going to be the 25% core creation cost. Well, let's talk about the rest of the idea group before we return to this core creation cost, because the other big bonus from administrative ideas is that finishing the entire idea group, and probably the reason why most people don't just take 3 in administrative and forget about it, is going to be the 20% governing capacity. This used to be 25%, but it was nerfed down to 20. Either way, still a very nice bonus for governing capacity and helping you avoid going over said governing capacity, which now costs admin efficiency when you do. But yes, so the governing capacity here is very nice and very recommended. In terms of other bonuses, you get some admin tech cost reduction, which is nice if you want to rush a tech early, but whatever, you're not taking it for the admin tech cost. You're probably not taking it for the monthly autonomy change, but again, it also helps if you're playing with Rogue Crownland and you're selling Crownland off every 5 seconds to maintain your war machine, because you should be doing that, and centralization helps you maintain it. That's just a nice bonus. It's not the end of the world. What is useless is going to be the promote culture cost. That's hardly ever comes into play unless you're very specifically stacking a promote culture cost, a reduction build, which is like possible but very obscure. You're not doing that in most campaigns. I won't even say most campaigns, you're pretty much not doing that 99.99% of your campaigns. What is nice with it is at least the advisor cost, especially being the first ability. You're able to take this once, and then because you can open this on Admin Tech 5 and take this. This advisor tech cost, because it comes so early, is actually nice. You can probably squeeze you an extra 1 admin point sometimes, but honestly, again, if you're stacking advisor cost, sure, otherwise it's not great, and a possible advisor is nice for cycling advisors. But yeah, the main reason this administrative idea group shines so much is going to be the core creation cost. That's because core creation cost, the way it works in EU4, not only lets you core everything for like 3 admin and just prevent you having issues in terms of not having admin to core everything, core creation cost also directly impacts core creation time. And while core creation cost itself can only be stacked to minus 80% for the cost reduction, which is already really strong and is one of the 2 modifiers you need to do a world conquest, and the other one is not admin efficiency, by the way, because you can usually world conquest before an admin efficiency even gets involved in the question, if you're not doing something stupidly like a one culture or whatever, that you can conquer before admin efficiency. Core creation cost and one other modifier that we'll get to in a second, those are the only 2 that matter really. And the reason core creation cost and core creation cost reduction time matters so much is that if you're able to get to minus 90% core creation time reduction, which requires 90% core creation cost as well, you're able to core every single province in 9 months. And the reason that's such a huge breaking point is that rebels, the way those work, is that they have a chance of, if they exist, to take up by 10% each month. So let's say you've taken 600% overextension, right? A stupid amount of overextension. If you have enough admin to core it immediately, and bear in mind again, if you have an 80% core creation cost, you're probably going to have enough admin to core it immediately. What's going to happen is that you're going to finish those cores in 9 months. And because the rebels take 10 months to tick up. On the 9th month, your cause will all finish. So all those rebels and all the unrest you have from and any kind of modifiers will just immediately disappear. And that means you can have a 18 months core and conquest cycle where you finish a big war and you finish everything within the same month. Basically, you piece out like 3 or 4 big wars all within the same month tick to make sure that you have all the extension at the same time. You start all those cores so that you can finish them in 9 months, and then you get going into your next war because you don't have any rebels for the first 9 months because you have no rebels at the start of this, and then you finish. You basically have 18 months to win your next round of wars, and then those cores finish, and then in 9 months, all the rebels are ticked up to 90%, tick back down to 0, so you have no rebels, at which point you can peace out for 600% overextension again, take max land, and not have to worry about it. Basically, any kind of core creation cost reduction build, because it is the most optimal build, is going to involve the 25% from administrative ideas, because there's not that many sources of CCR in the game. So yeah, this is why core creation cost is so amazing. And this is literally the only thing that maintains admin ideas in such high regard. Now, early on, we're going to have sometimes doing what we like to call vassal builds, where you have a bunch of vassals running around, and that's because super early on, you don't have access to other monuments that can give you governing capacity. So, for example, inside of Spain, there's a monument in Madrid for 10% gov capacity. If you just accept the Iberian culture or become Roman, as well as building a monument here for 100 flat governing capacity. So there's a couple of monuments that give you governing capacity. There's also obviously the not the Bagan temples, but the one in Baghdad for 20% and so on and so forth. So you can certainly solve governing capacity of that nature, but early on you're going to struggle with it. And also you're going to struggle with admin points early before you got your CCR build going. And hence, I'm bringing all that up because vassal builds tend to be pretty viable and an option. And you could just annex the vassals and move on, but here I want to make an honorable mention to specifically influence ideas. Now, influence ideas are not in the top 5, but influence ideas provide for a pretty powerful build that is pretty underused. And that is just basically creating a horde of vassals that you integrate. And the reason that admin influence specifically is very nice is that because influence has 25% dip annexation cost, which you're able to combine with administrative influence as a policy, hence the honorable mention immediately, for minus 15% dip annexation cost. That's just good. Influence ideas also we're going to later see for one culture builds with religious ideas have 15% culture conversion cost, which again, if you're going for the one cultures, the more try-hard achievements, shall we say, of doing a one faith or a one culture, getting those culture conversion costs is obviously really necessary, and this is why influence shines so much within those environments. The reason I'm not that fussed about the culture conversion cost as I am about dip annexation cost is that dip annexation cost, not that many sources of it in the game to be honest, and influence with the 25% here and the admin influence policy for 15% is one of the few sources you actually have access to. So that's kind of why I mention it. In terms of culture conversion cost, you do get 25% from religious. We'll talk about that later. You also get 25% from adjacency. And you also, most crucially, pick up 25% here in enlightenment. So you can get to 75% pretty much instantly. And that's with one idea group and just being adjacent. And if you take into account that you'll be able to get 100% inventoriness just by the 1700s, even if you don't take inventory ideas, even if you don't do anything special, just by the random slew of events that you'll get playing the game, you're going to have minus 10% all power cost, and that provides you culture conversion costs. You'll be sitting at minus 85% culture conversion cost. You basically have enough just from that alone, which is why I value the culture conversion cost from specifically influence and religious a bit less, but that's a separate point. The reason again that influence is also quite nice is that if you are doing all of these vassal builds and you have all these subjects, influence ideas is also very nice just to get more value out of them. More specifically, be able to abuse their liberty desire a lot more and take them for more, so for example, if you have personal unions, you can take more money from them because of the liberty desire from subjects here, and as well as the dip rep, which helps you maintain them. And the other thing is as well with a lot of subjects, what you'll find is that if you have a bunch of them and you take a big peace deal where you take 600% of extension, you're going to lose a lot of dip rep from that, and this plus 2 dip rep not only helps you annex things faster because it gives you your annexation speed is based on your dip rep, it also helps you offset dip rep penalties when you take like 100 billion war score worth of land or whatever. Envoy travel time is also really, really helpful. This can be somewhat mitigated in some extremes, and at the end of the day, you can't just wait envoy travel time out, but it's helpful too, so it's something I don't want to knock down too much of a peg. And of course, vassal force and contribution is nice if you have 100 billion vassals, so everything in influence is just really good if you're specifically doing vassal build. And if it was just a vassal build, I wouldn't even bring it up here as an honorable mention. But finally, as a real nail in the coffin for influence builds, is that if you're not doing a true one tag and you're planning to have colonies, so you have, you don't just like do a full one tag where you move your capital to the new world, you actually intend to have colonies and so you have a bunch of vassals subjects over there. Those colonies are affected by the influence 100% vassal forcible contribution, as well as the liberty desire in subjects. So you're able to apply the influence buffs because technically colonies are just glorified vassals, and for that reason, it's pretty good. But honorable mentions aside, at number 2 we're going to have the other idea group that provides the second modifier you need to do a world conquest before the 1600s or try hard your EU4 campaigns, and that's going to be diplomatic ideas with province force for cost. Yep, that's really about it. Province force score cost is absolutely insane. It's basically admin efficiency at home before you have admin efficiency. Yes, it doesn't decrease the core creation cost, and it does not decrease the overextension impact, but it lets you take all the land you want. And if you stack this enough, you're able to take like the entirety of, say, China in one war. It's incredible, and something I would certainly recommend you stack. Works extra well with admin efficiency, of course, because you're able to so province force score capped is capped reduction wise at minus 90%, but so is admin efficiency capped, but they are multiplicatively capped with each other. So if you have 90 of both, you're able to have minus 99% effective cost reduction. So you just take like 100 provinces in one war regardless of their development. Very strong, can commend. Otherwise, rest diplomatic ideas is very You get a lot of diplomats from this one, so that is nice. It also helps you cycle diplomats if you want to be doing a lot of peace deals. That's useful. The improved relations helps with the EU reduction, and it's just nice. It's kind of funny that you have diplomats 1 and then an extra diplomat with a double bonus here, which is kind of interesting. It's literally just a straight up better version of a bonus here, which is funny. The dip relations helps, I find, not specifically as much as it should. It's okay if you're also doing influence for a vassal build, where the dip prep +2 also shines. Otherwise, it's a bit whatever. I tend to be sitting under dip relations a lot of the time anyway, because I tend to not trust the AI allies. But if you want to have a whole bunch of AI allies for preventing coalitions or kind of coalition truce juggling, that's fine. And if you also request a lot of no access, it's useful, so it's not even the worst. And again, the diplomatic advisor cost, I rarely find myself running a lot of dip advisors, like at +5 levels, so this one is a bit less useful than the admin one, but it's still nice. And of course, the dip tech cost it helps you take dip to Act 27 faster for imperialism. Otherwise, I don't care. The final ability is actually probably the most useful part of diplomatic, the lowest impact on stability from diplomatic actions, because you can combine this with the universally available Machiavellian Reign for -1 stamp hit to declare war. And this is really strong because it basically makes no CB unironically the best CB. Well, it's not actually that good, but it lets you no CB without a stab hit, which is very strong. And also this one tends to have max absolutism attached to it, so it's also nice to pick up in general, I find as well. Basically, this is a good reform and it works really well with diplomatic ideas. It also means that if you are truce breaking, it's even less punishing now that you have the halved impact from stability loss from diplomatic actions, which involves truce breaking, as well as now stab it declare war -1, meaning that again, you're able to truce break and do all those naughty things with even less punishment involved. So indeed, much like administrative ideas has a lot of power behind this 20% GovCap modifier reduction, diplomatics lowered impact on stability from diplomatic actions is really, really strong, and certainly a bonus I would recommend you pick up. Hence meaning that diplomatic ideas is going to be sitting comfortably in the second spot, mainly due to the promise force for cost reduction, but yeah, this is also really, really nice to have when you're blobbing. But yes, ironically enough, administrative ideas and diplomatic ideas are all you need, as it were. If you're stacking CCR and promise force cost, that's it, you're done. You can now go and conquer the world. You don't technically need anything else beyond that. But there are certainly other things that are nice to have, and the third item on our list is going to be none other than, of course, religious ideas. So why religious ideas? What's so amazing about religious ideas? Well, they're one of the few sources of universal +1 missionary you can pick up in the game. So if you are specifically going for one faith or one cultures, they're crucial. And this is actually kind of a theme I'm going to go with this idea group, is that if you're going for the one faith or one culture, or both, obviously, because you can't really one culture without one faith unless you are doing the, I believe, the Tengri hordes have an ability to culture convert with their syncretized religion. But otherwise, a one culture is a one faith, right? And religious ideas are just really, really, really good at those, right? So missionary maintenance cost is whatever, but +1 missionary is huge. You pick up 3% missionary strength to really get those conversions going. Tolerance of true faith, it technically helps with revolts, but it's a bit... It's stronger than people think it is, because tolerance of true faith stacking is... It's nice to have, especially within the one cultures and one faith runs, because it means that more university land that you own has less revolts. And I actually value, if you are going for a one faith, for weirdly enough, plus the tolerance for true faith more than -2 unrest, and that is that, yes, -2 unrest is better, strictly, in almost every environment, but in a very weird specific case, if you are going for court and country, you need to get your national unrest to be above 0, right? And -2 unrest is going to hurt you get that threshold met for court and country. It's not like a difficult threshold, just take 500% overextension, right? However, it can technically be annoying sometimes, and I've had that be an annoying factor too many times where I kind of value stacking tolerance for true faith and just going for the one faith a bit more. You pick up some papal influence or church power or whatever, that's just nice to interact with. If you have those religions that are affected by this, this is a good thing to have. Opinion of countries with the same religion is the most but it can be nice if you're going for some kind of, if you're trying to get plus 10 opinion and it's away from getting to 190 for a diplomatic offer of a vassalization or something of that nature. It's not the worst, but whatever. And of course, finally, the big thing with religious is you get Deus Vult. Deus Vult is amazing because it saves you all of the dip points ever. Now, naturally, it doesn't work against people of your own religion, but it gives you a budgetary imperialism on everyone else. And outside of some very early big religious groups like Catholics and Sunnis, most other religions that you'll be playing, like even something like Orthodox, let's say you're doing a Russia campaign or you are doing a Byzantium campaign, right? There's not going to be that many Orthodox compared to fighting everyone else, so you're just going to have free CBs on most people around you. And considering that you're probably picking this idea group up third, let's say you're doing this as Byzantium, by the time you picked up this idea group, you've probably killed, like, everything here. And if you're playing as Russia, you've probably killed everything here. So it's like, oh no, I don't get a CB on Byzantium potentially. Oh well. Right, I'm not saying that if you are picking religious up third, you've killed Europe as a Catholic, but very conveniently, Europe goes through the whole Protestant Reformation and gets Reformed going, so even then it applies. And even if you're doing something like soon, you're doing the Ottomans, yeah, indeed, by the time you've taken religious third, you're probably already here in Morocco if you know what you're doing. So again, should be less of an issue. I tend to find that more often than not, the Deus Vult bonus just does apply and just does work, so that part is really good and hence is commendable. You do finally also pick up Clergy Loyalty Equilibrium. I don't care if you're doing a World Conquest, you're going to have enough monuments that give you Clergy Loyalty Equilibrium, but the crucial part is, again, the relatively easy and relatively universal culture conversion cost, and this is why this idea group is basically mandatory for one culture and one religion runs. The missionary strength is very nice here. The extra missionary is really, really good depending on your builds, because you only get 2 with religious ideas, so it's a huge boost to religious speed conversion. That part's amazing. And the manpower and true faith provinces, 10% seems like it's quite sad, and it is, let's be honest, but the way that works is that it's a province modifier. So if you look at something like here, like we have a province that is giving us 500 manpower, it's going to apply 10% here, so it's going to go from a province giving us 500 to 550, which means that it's then going to apply on our universal pool, that our maximum manpower is going to increase by 50, if we only had Shrewsbury, for example, and that was the only province that applied the extra 10%, which means that then the manpower recovery speed and any other manpower bonuses that would have apply on top of this final pool, so you kind of get a multiplicative effect going with other manpower bonuses, and that's why manpower bonuses specifically on True Faith provinces are actually quite nice in that regard, because they're multiplicative with other manpower bonuses. You shouldn't struggle with manpower. You're probably not taking manpower for, well, you're not taking religious for the manpower, but it's still just another small nice thing to have that I'm not complaining too much about. Then the main thing with religious ideas is the missionary strength, the Deus Vult, free CB, and the culture conversion cost. And I also want to very quickly mention of why Deus Vult is such a nice CB. It's not only the convenience factor of having CB on everyone, is that every single bit of land that you take against a heretic or heathen with Deus Vult is not considered an unjust demand. And what that means is that you will be saving insane amounts of dip points on unjust demands. Technically, diplomatic ideas can already help you with unjust demands to some extent, whilst they're not a diplomatic influence here because it decreases it by 50%. And there are some tier 1 government reforms, for example, I believe autocracy. Well, I can't hover over it because I'm England, that's a bit annoying, that have unjust demands reduction. So you can kind of stack that away from it. But I'll be honest, don't bother. Just if you need to stack unjust demands, don't stack it and just justify all your demands by doing Deus Vult. I think, unfortunately, the reality of the situation, unjust demands is a very powerful modifier in the sense that it can hurt you. If you take like 1,000 development unjust demands, it'll cost you like 900 dip points, and that's it. You don't get to play the game for a bit. But beyond that, getting imperialism or getting Deus Vult early is just the way forward in that regard. But that's going to conclude the third placement. And with that, we're going to move on to the fourth idea group on our list. And this is, again, by the time we're starting to enter the nice to have section. And that's going to be espionage ideas. I know, right? Espionage ideas. So why espionage ideas? Well, they are really useful in practically one environment, Germany. And by really useful, I mean if you're playing in Germany, this 20% A reduction is almost necessary to prevent coalitions. Now, if you're playing something like the Ottomans, by the time you get to Germany, you don't really need this A reduction because you've usually outscaled the coalition already. However, if you're actually starting in Germany for whatever reason, like you want to do, I don't know, an Anhalt world conquest, then you are probably best off getting the AU reduction from state propaganda than you are getting CCR or getting dip annexation, or getting province force cost. Because in many cases, in the early game in Germany, before like I'd say 1480, 1490, AE is your biggest problem. And this solves a lot of your AE problems, especially once you start stacking it, as you're able to get minus 10% from prestige reduction and so on and so forth. So it definitely helps when you're stacking AE reduction to have espionage ideas minus 20% here, right? That's fine. Where espionage ideas also weirdly enough shines is going to be the vassalization acceptance of plus 15. That's actually quite big, and it also means that you can get a bunch of free vassals if you're again trying to go for this vassal build early on that I've mentioned quite a few times. It ironically doesn't work too well in Germany because all the HRE princes have a big modifier to not accept vassalization because they're HRE princes. But it's quite nice to just get vassals you wouldn't normally be able to, and it's a nice feature in that regard. The monthly favor growth is ironically something that have been very nice and thematic and diplomatic ideas, but is also quite strong. And otherwise, it's a bit whatever. If you're doing a privateering build, woo, privateer efficiency and chance to capture enemy builds. And no, not foreign spy detection. I'll be able to catch foreign spies a bit better. I'll give you a hint, this doesn't matter. The spies you're able to build on you anyway and get those claims. You don't prevent people declaring war on you by catching them and stopping them building claims. You prevent people declaring war on you by outscaling them and having been stronger than them, right? The yearly corruption here is nice, and this is one of the other things that I want to mention as a closet mini powerful thing that people don't realize. If you are regularly taking 500, 600, 700% overextension, right, you're going to be at a state where you're earning more than +1 yearly corruption. So what that means is that because the max amount that you can root out is kind of capped at the max of the slider, just having any kind of yearly corruption reduction builds in things like espionage is actually quite strong, as it lets you still maintain a decent takedown on corruption, as that's one of those things that like gets out of hand if you're really blobbing too much, right? So that's another one of the closet buffs. The diplomat here is nice, and you get 15% advisor cost, making it almost comparable to innovative ideas. Thank you, Paradox, for buffing espionage so much that innovative is practically useless, but that's a separate debate. No, but where this also diplomat comes in is that naturally it scales even well diplomatic ideas, is that you can have like 7 diplomats, and that's really helpful. It kind of offsets envoy travel time issues if you just have a lot of diplomats. And obviously the other thing with having lots of diplomats is very nice is that diplomats can build your spy networks for siege ability, and those diplomats can be used if you have like 7 of them free to piece out 6 or 7 wars immediately to start coring everything immediately within the same month, right? So that's where diplomats are really nice, and hence I actually value this diplomat even more. However, the efficient spies is really nice because not only are you able to get your spy networks up 50% faster, that's great, you have 10% siege ability, and siege ability is great for going fast. That's about it. A lot of EU4 combat against the AI isn't actually involved fighting them. It's about base racing and winning base races, and 10% siege ability, while not amazing, is a pretty good bonus to win said base races. So yeah, a commendation on efficient spies. The AE is what we talked about here. And finally, of course, you can transfer subjects peace treaty. That's reasonable sometimes for very specific cases. Like, for example, if you go fight Denmark early, you'll be able to transfer Norway, their personal union, into you as a vassal. That lets you grab a lot of land relatively cheaply, because it means that the war score cost of Norway is effectively halved. However, if you're stacking war score cost, you're better off just taking diplomatic ideas and stacking war score cost, right? So the transfer subjects I'm not that fussed about, and neither am I fussed about can claim entire states. But it can be situationally nice, otherwise I'm not going to commend it as something hyper amazing. Now, for me, espionage ideas, and finally, to be clear, the rebel support efficiency is super whatever. The spike cost is also kind of okay, but even then, not really. I will say that espionage ideas is mainly carried by, if you're in Germany, you kind of need the aggressive expansion impact, and otherwise it's great for siege races on the siege ability bonus, and it's great on the vassalization acceptance to grab random vassals. Overall, espionage ideas is basically a siege ability Germany early expansion bonus, so make of that what you will. It's certainly not necessary, and not the end of the world. The one thing with espionage, though, is that it has surprisingly good ideas. Surprisingly good policies you wouldn't expect espionage to have. So it's not, if you have taken it early, I would actually recommend just keeping it because the policies can be quite neat. For example, if you go administrative and espionage, a pretty common combo, you get another minus 20% advisor cost and minus 0.15 yearly corruption. And if you take a look at administrative espionage, you have minus 25% advisor cost here, minus 20% advisor cost here, and minus 15% advisor cost here, meaning you have minus 60% advisor cost on your admin advisors with 2 idea groups. And I mean, yes, you can outscale that, I don't deny it, but that's basically giving you pretty free admin advisors, so you have no excuse if you ever do admin espionage of not running a +5 admin advisor like the moment you have this up, right? And you also will have a passive minus 0.35 yearly corruption, as you have minus 0.2 here and minus 0.15 from the policy, so very strong. If you're also stacking siege ability and you happen to be theocracy, the divine idea is another thing that's worth highlighting. 10% siege ability and artillery level contribution to siege is very, very nice and something I will commend. Otherwise, it also has a very good bonus with specifically religious ideas for +2 missionary strength, which is, again, great. So if you're going for those one faith, as espionage just doesn't really hurt you. It's an extra 2% missionary strength, you're not complaining. Just, again, surprisingly good policies all around, and hence recommend it. It also has a very nice policy with offensive ideas for 25% spy network construction speed. And remember, spy networks are siege ability, because if you have 100% on someone, that's plus 20% siege ability. So make sure you don't forget to do those, although a lot of people just do. And that brings us to the final point. What is the 5th idea that we're going to mention here? And it's going to be a mill one. I've kind of alluded to it with the espionage ideas policy. It's going to be offensive. So why offensive? Well, offensive shines in a very specific way, but it's also the specific way that happens to be the most optimal way of playing EU4, hence it does a good job shining, if that makes any sense. So, let's walk through it almost back to front. 5% discipline. You're never going to complain about this bonus. Now, 5% discipline doesn't help you fight rebels, but if you're playing the game properly, you should never be fighting rebels, because admin ideas 90% CCR means you should not have rebels, and if you do have rebels, there's a couple event rebels and that's it. But 5% discipline means that even if you have an AI that's taking something like economic quality against you, and they have 10% discipline, which they rarely do, but they will, this kind of halves that AI almost military quality build advantage, and is a pretty big quality bonus. If you are in any environment struggling with fighting the AI, this helps a surprising amount, and it does also mean that if you grab the offensive ideas 5% discipline and run the 5% discipline advisor, you have a 10% discipline swing against your enemies, you'll be super fine. And what this does also mean is that you can maintain a lot more wars on a lot more fronts, because you just have more troops in more areas and you have to think less about them. This is kind of like a almost mini mental health bonus. But anyway, it's 5% discipline. I'm never going to complain about 5% discipline, even in a try-hard campaign. It's not a bad bonus to have. However, you also pick up, well, 15% land force limit modifier, but also special unit cost modifier minus 20%. Special unit cost modifier, whatever, to be honest, can be nice in certain environments, but it's whatever. The main thing is 15% land force limit modifier isn't as great as something like quantity, which has 33%, sure, but this 18% land force limit modifier has a secret closet buff attached to it, namely that you want to be rushing to get military hegemon as fast as possible, because that promises military cost minus 10%, and that's good. It also gives you movement speed, which is nice. It gives you siege ability, which is great. It gives you land attrition, so more manpower effective, and it gives you monthly mill points, so you can barrage even more. So military hegemon is the hegemon that you should be taking, unless you're role-playing as something else, and in that case, that's not part of the debate. Because you want to be taking mill hegemon, you need to get 1 million troops in the field, unless you're France or any other Paradox innovation lets them take it early. But you get the point. You want more manpower, and you want, more specifically, more force limit to field more troops. And this is where the 15% from offensive comes in quite clutch, because it lets you just squeeze out a bit more manpower, a bit more force limit, not manpower, doesn't help with manpower again, sorry, I don't know why I keep mentioning manpower, helps you squeeze out a bit more force limit just to get to that break point and just get to that mill hegemon point of view. So that part's great, and this is one I will commend. However, you pick up the big 20% siege ability, double the espionage bonus. This is the real reason you're taking offensive ideas. You win base races with this, so you win wars. This is what makes offensive good, basically. You have prestige from land battles, I don't care. You get land leader fire and land leader shock, and you also get recover on brass speed, we'll talk about at the end. But what this land leader fire and land leader shock does, which is kind of a bit of a weird closet buff, is that it's a surprisingly well hidden quality buff. All your generals now effectively have an extra pip that they'll be fighting with, unless you're already fighting with 6/6 generals, in which case, yeah, fine, you don't need this quality buff. If you have 6/6 generals consistently, you don't need extra quality, right? So this does nothing, but at that point, you don't need it to do anything. But this extra quality buffs means, again, you need less troops all the way around you. And more importantly, where this kind of works, and you're gonna not probably believe me when I say this, But where this works best in terms of having extra pips on your generals is that I do believe the AI kind of over-evaluates the general impact to battle contribution. What that means is that if you have really good generals, it's a very easy way of scaring the AI away from fighting you. And that can be a bit annoying sometimes if you want to fight them for war score, but if you want war score, just full occupy them, as ironic as it sounds. And what that means is that this saves you manpower, because you're not taking fights against the AI. The best way to defeat an AI army is to annex 80% of their country so they delete their troops because they can't afford them, right? The ideal Ottoman against Mamluk war, for example, is you as the Ottomans, you have so many troops and such overwhelming quality as you just kind of march into Syria, you march into Palestine here, and you march into Cairo. You never take a battle because you outnumber the Mamluks 2-1, but you also save loads of manpower in the process because you never take a battle. You get to 100 war score from occupations, and you either pop the mission to make them into a islet, or you just full annex them anyway. Doesn't really matter what you do, but the point is you defeat the Mamluk army without ever fighting the Mamluk army, and that's how you save manpower, and that's how you save resources, and most crucially, this is also how you save money, because you're not taking fights. And where these two bonuses shine is that I think the AI really over-evaluates the equality of troops, and so just having better generals is a great way of intimidating the AI. Finally, you pick up recruitment time. That's a bit nice for getting troops a bit faster, but this is filler in the best case, unless you want to stack recruitment time to something like minus 100%, in which case you have instant armies. Great. If you want instant armies, play the Ottomans and build Janissaries, to be honest, but that's the thing. And finally, recover army morale speed. Now, this is deceptively strong. The reason is that the way recover army morale works is, let me just stop paying for my troops here for a second, and I unfortunately think it's going to be back to full. It is, but if we take a look at this morale, see that we will recover 20% of our maximum morale. We have a base 15%, we have plus 5% for being on our controlled provinces, and army tradition gives us some bonus as well. That plus 10% recover army morale isn't plus 20% to that 20 here, it's plus 20% to our base amount, so go from 20 to 30%. That's actually really strong, and that means that you're able to get away with not paying for your troops more aggressively. It also means that if you ever do lose battles, you're able to come back a lot faster. It's just a good bonus to have. And also bear in mind the plus 5% for being on controlled provinces does just go away if you're in enemy land. So yeah, again, you're usually recovering around 15 to 20%. You're going to bump that up from 15 to 20% to 30% if you're in enemy territory. And that means that effectively, instead of recovering every 5 months to max morale, to go from 0 to max morale, because if you're at 20%, it takes you 5 months, right? You're going to go from, well, you're going to have 30%, so you're going to recover most of the way there in 3 months instead. It's a bit of an exaggeration over the top, but this is also one of the reasons I actually quite like any army morale recovery speed, right? Because it lets you just get back in the fight faster if you are not paying attention to a stack and you get a notification that you lost a battle. You're like, oh, oops, I guess I'm losing this front now, and you can just get back in there and recover a bit faster. So this is one of the reasons I value offensive ideas. But yeah, no, to be absolutely clear, that while these things are great and are nice, especially with offensive espionage bonuses, for example, diplomatic and administrative are the only two idea groups you truly need. With that said, though, that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Stilemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best for Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Kono, Andre Salberg, Deki, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, Mr. Kumshok, Yukata, Danray, Arthur Tan, Jack, and Marvi.